the funniest thing that y'all were saying about this reverse thing. So I've been doing some of that on my album as well, but not for the demonic purposes.
I'd be like, you playing records backing on your record? Y'all, so we want to absolutely welcome DJ Saint Smith to tonight's show. So I'm going to read Smith's bio because it is meaty, of course. The new classic is being redefined thanks to R&B crooner Saint Smith. Hailing from Baltimore, Maryland, shout out to Baltimore. The 27-year-old singer-songwriter is blending today's R&B with 90s soul music. Inspired by artists from D'Angelo to B. Slade, Smith has created his own unique sound and donning it church and B. We cannot wait to talk about this.
Yes.
So, already performing with and impressing the likes of Faith Evans, Tweet, and Kim Burrell, to name a few, Smith is proving to become one of R&B's most promising new acts. Growing up in a dual pastoral household, Smith was introduced to music, particularly gospel, at an early age. Inspirational acts such as the Clark Sisters, the Winans, Shirley Caesar were the soundtrack to Smith's budding artistry. When left unattended, Smith would secretly listen to secular artists like Prince, D'Angelo, Faith Evans, and Maxwell for hours. Quote, "They've really helped shape the way I think musically. I grew up in church. Both of my parents are pastors, so I definitely have a heavy gospel influence in my music and concepts." Now residing in Atlanta, Saint Smith has taken up a new musical craft of DJing and has been performing all over the city. Yo, it is time to welcome DJ Saint Smith to the room. Welcome.
How you feeling?
Thank you. I'm feeling great. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And I feel like this is actually my first interview as a DJ. So I'm very, very excited about that and happy to be there. Hopefully I'll drop some exclusives that, make the headlines tomorrow.
I know that's right. Some gems, some we gonna go viral. We're gonna have a viral moment tonight. Let's do that.
Yo,
that's our goal.
So I think this is great to start us off. So of course we have your background, but I think what's so interesting, I'm just curious about you, like how you arrived to this place. Like we had Round and Round on our best of 2021. Shout out to Darius Amore. Nice. That was his entry into that. Darius is the homie. And you have all of these influences that just stew in the work that you're doing. Can you tell us about your lineage, your musical lineage? What brings you to this seat and this place in your life and your musical artistry?
I love that question because when I do like my classes and stuff, that's kind of one of the first things that I talk about, because I think it's so important to talk about your family, your musical family tree. So I'm just going to keep it current, like within the last 30 to 40 years. I'm not going to take it as far back as I can because we'll be here all day. But I have to shout out Faith Evans. When I talk about probably the biggest inspiration to my artistry, I have to just shout her out. I don't even know how or why that is the case, but I'm just glad that it is. I love her so much. B. Slade, formerly known as Tone, he is such a huge inspiration. I call him like my musical father. But then you have like the branches. So, the Carl Thomas, the Joes, the Case. He is like a musical father to me, the Kelly Price, the Mary Marys, the Warren Campbells. So, just all of those kind of, like you said, have just been stewing and really informing a lot of the creative work that I've been doing.
Wow. That's powerful. Do you come from a musical fame? Like, is your family musical at all?
No, and that's one of the things that I wish that I had, like that Clark Sisters. That's another person. I don't know why I didn't mention Clark, but like Karen Clark, she is my favorite singer of all time. Like I love the Clark Sisters. So like, that's one thing that I always miss. And I think that like my family is musical in their own kind of way, but not like enough to kind of like put us together and do a group like the Walls group or something like that. So I kind of like am Black Sheep in that way, but I've also kind of come to appreciate that part of it too. Like, I'm kind of one-on-one, I'm Black Sheep of the family.
Now, it's funny that you use that term Black Sheep of the family because, being in your bio, it states clearly you are a PK.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm pretty certain that all those of us who grew up in and around church are familiar with the whole, everything that revolves around church, including choir practice and Sabbath school, or in my case, Sabbath school. I grew up Seventh Day Adventist, but
Okay. Yeah.
church school, all of that stuff.
Yes.
So in your matriculation as an artist, becoming who you are, and singing what is called secular music, what
Hmm.
was that journey like, and what was there a battle um, to become the artist that you are now, and not be a gospel, a gospel inspirational artist to please, perhaps your family and the people that you grew up with?
Okay, so I love this question too. And part of my therapy work is I am a people pleaser. So like I definitely have that, especially for my parents. I care so deeply about my parents and their opinions and their thoughts on things. And so I've been an artist for 10 years. I celebrated 10 years this year last month. So I've been in the game for 10
Shout out.
years. Before all of this all happened, I thought I was going to be a gospel artist. The only reason that I became a artist at all is because of an artist. I'm a shout out to Brittany Wright, who is, I think, from Cleveland, but she spent time in Baltimore by way of Morgan State University. And I saw her one time and I thought I was going to be, I always was musical. I always was like in music and things like that. So but I mean, I saw her one time in live when she was like doing her debut album concert. And I mean, it literally changed like my life. I knew that I wanted to be an artist after seeing her. She was just dynamic. So it was even so much to the point that I ended up working with the team that produced her debut album. That became like my production team. I was just so moved by what she did. And so I thought I was going to do gospel. And I just remember kind of like being at this crossroads, like you said, having that internal battle where I was feeling like, okay, here's what it looks like, here's the best case scenario in both routes. And, I knew that I wanted to be innovative and I wanted to be creative. And I had seen what a lot of my predecessors in the gospel industry, what they got for the punishments they got for innovating and the punishments
Mm-hmm.
they got for being creative. So I thought, what I want to do, uh, I want to kind of do something different. I want to go a different route. And so I talked to my parents about it and I kind of got their blessing to
Nice.
move forward in that way. And that they're I think like when people think of PKs and when I tell people that my parents are pastors and get this image in their mind of this stark like pastor, but my parents are like the coolest like pastors and just break down the word in such a way that is just palatable for all. So, I was just happy to kind of get their blessing. And once I got that, I was kind of free to just move forward. And I think just like you said, all my experiences and just my new influences and all those things just have kind of created this hodgepodge of music craziness that I can kind of like dip in and dip out of as I choose.
And I think that's the wonderful part of it, as somebody, as a music lover, as somebody who has an ear for creatives, and hearing all of your influences. It's wild to me that some people can't hear the influences, the spiritual side of you in your music. Even someone like a Beyonce is not cannot escape criticism. We have Bishop Patrick Wooten, who said what he said about about Church Girl and her use of the Clark Sisters sample. And then of
Mhm.
course we also got Juanita Bynum wilding out on, to Usher in her in one of her latest clips that's floating around now. When you see people like that, it almost feels like it's 1973 all over again. You're way too young to remember what that was like. You weren't even around.
Right here.
But there was this whole movement. I'll put it like this. I'll never when I was about 8, I think about 7 or 8 years old, or 9, in school. I went to a private Seventh-day Adventist school. We had a pastor come to us and tell us to bring him all of our rap cassettes and rap albums and put them at the feet of the altar, and they were going to destroy all those records because it was secular, and we it was full of demonic messages that you could hear spinning them backwards. I don't know if y'all heard
That
about
was
backwards masking.
the crazy
Yes.
80s conspiracy
The crazy
of play the records backwards.
It was called backwards masking, and if
Yeah.
you played a record backwards you could hear demonic messages being said to you on these records. So that's what it feels like it feels like we're regressing to burning books and restricting books. And now here comes these evangelical figures talking about music now. And how does that make you feel as an artist and moving forward in your artistry? Like, is feeling like, is that going to be a battle for me coming to the stage, as it were, with my artistry?
Okay, I love this question because y'all don't even know. Like, I got stuff coming that flirts with this line that y'all don't even know about. Like, it's still on the stove. And I've been talking to my friends about this, specifically about like the church girl stuff, because I am saved and I love me some Jesus. And I recently started going back to church, like after maybe 7 years. I just recently started going back to church. So my sensitivity is different, but how I've always approached it, and just with my experience, just like I said, like who my parents are, and just how I've always been raised. Whenever I do something that is touches the religious or sacred, I am very, very careful. So like even with like the party, like the water to wine party, like, that was kind of like a little like, oh, like I get it, but I gotta be catchy. But like, I'm just always just very careful about how I approach it, because I always do want to be very respectful. I don't necessarily agree with the bishop that you're talking about, but I also know that like if you're gonna use sacred and religious music and songs, you always have to be careful, or you have to be open to whatever the backlash is going to be, and you have to know that that's going to come, like especially what you're saying, and I, like I said, I love that song. I don't have any problems with it, but I just know that's what comes along with it. The conversation happens. So just with my own personal artistry, it is so much a part of who I am that it's not like a foot on, and I'm not like making it up. But I also am very sensitive about like how I approach it, because I know that it is very religious and, in a lot of ways sacred to a lot of people. And I think the funny thing about this, and this is what I was like telling my friend, like when you hear these little people, like the bishop, not little people, but like the bishop, or like the Juanita Bynum, as they're saying this, you can almost guarantee that you're going to hear people saying their amens and shouting in the background. So it's like, for some people it's working, for some people it's registering and it's hitting and it's making it do what it do. For me, as a person that grew up in a religious home, like many others in our age bracket, age group, and have the pleasure and displeasure, how you look at it, of having pastors as parents, and having not been in the church, maybe in almost a decade, my sensitivity is different. So when I'm hearing that, I'm kind of like, oh, like that's all. But if I was in church and I was like, living that life, and it might work for me, it might hit different. So I just have to be kind of like aware of that. But I know it's kind of like roundabout, but that's just kind of how I approach it. Just, I'm gonna give a reference. I'm going to, have some type of church stuff in my music, but I'm always just super careful about it. So that way, if it is any like backlash or feedback, it's minimal.
And I think this is a good place to actually open, since you opened the door to this and talking about the Water to Wine Gospel Day Party.
Yeah.
So, all right. What's been really, really dope is listening to these mixes and these blends that you've been doing. Cause I'm like, oh, that's all right. Okay. Where it's like, all right, folks are going to be ready to hit the floor to these songs.
Yes.
Tell us about how the concept for this event came about.
Yes.
And what you hope people get from it.
I love that. Okay, so how it came about. So as we've already talked about, like I have tons of gospel influences. I have tons of like R&B influences, and I just started DJing like last year, and so my experiences are still really new. But all of my gigs thus far have been private gigs. So like corporate gigs or private gigs where, it's not anything I can invite somebody to. It's like a company, like a shout out to like Slutty Vegan. Like I was doing some gigs for them, or Shout out to my
Yes.
my friend's law school, Atlanta's John Marshall. Like I played their barrister's ball. So like it's like private events. And so when I thought about kind of having my own event, I just was kind of like, what do I want to do? And like, how can I do things different? Because I feel like Atlanta is the brunch/day party capital of the United States. I mean, y'all can find me. I mean, DC has a good record too. And we're going to DC next, but Atlanta is just that for me. And so I thought about like, where can I plug in and how can I get people engaged? And so me and my friend was kind of talking, like I was like, I just wish somebody would ask me to do like a gospel brunch because I know gospel music and now and I know what hits. And so he was just like, well, why don't you just do it yourself? And I'm like, right, why don't I? And so it just came about. And jokingly, I kind of tweeted about it where I was like, hey, I want to have a day party where I play nothing but gospel music, but everybody can like still drink and like do whatever they do. And it kind of went mini viral. So, it didn't go like thousands viral, but it got like in that 150 range where I was like, oh, okay, people are interested in this. So I just started kind of like just canvassing people, kind of building it out, kind of thinking about the set. And I was just like, oh no, we're definitely going to do this. And, I think sometimes you work things backwards. So obviously that was kind of like, I love gospel music. I would play that as my first public gig. But then you start rolling it back and thinking about, wow, we're in a space now where like the Roe v. Wade stuff that happened,
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine is happening,
Mm-hmm.
all the stuff that we're regularly going through, COVID, monkeypox. And it's just like, I love what DJ Sardane was saying earlier about just creating spaces where you can escape and really just have a moment of break where you're not faced with the troubles of the world. And, day parties do that anyway, but I thought like, what better vehicle to do that with gospel music? And, gospel is like that translation of good news. And I felt like it's just so appropriate right now where gospel is such a universal thing, like where I think
Mm.
that we're like, oh, I don't really know a lot of gospel music, but I'm like, y'all do, y'all really know so much more than you realize.
Mhm.
And just kind of hearing those affirming messages and those chants and
Mm.
those anthems that you just are kind of like, things are gonna get better. I am healed. You're just kind of singing and saying those things on on a subconscious level, but as you're, saying and saying those things, it does, take effect and it is very impactful. And so I thought like, hey, let's do this. This is Atlanta. We're in the Bible Belt. We're on the South. Like, people know what time it is. And so that's where it came from. And I just want people to have that experience. I want people to come feeling like, wow, like, I feel refreshed. I feel like I had a break from my day to day. I feel like, the words that I was singing over myself really did, have an impact on the rest of my summer, back to school, all those kinds of things. So that's, that was the intention behind it. Yeah.
And I have to say, I want to recognize the fact that you are creating the event, like you said, because so when I noticed that Saint was doing the DJ thing, I kind of would like every now and then I would see his clips and I would send him little DMs and be like, hey, when you're doing this, make sure. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is my little bro, my little DJ bro. So I'm like, okay, please get yourself something higher because I don't want you to wear your back out. Stuff
Yeah.
like that. I want to make sure that he's good because I see that he's tapped in, J Ray, into the ministry part,
Mm-hmm.
the ministry part of DJing,
Mm-hmm.
because all of us, what we do in some form or another is we are speaking to people's plights or we're speaking to whatever they need to at the time, right? And so I'm so happy that you tapped into that because we have to keep doing those things because there are not a whole lot of places where we can be free to take a direction of a gospel
Mm-hmm.
brunch or like J Ray was there the inception of my of a lot of those parties that I was doing several
Mm-hmm.
years ago where I would do like a theme party
Mm-hmm.
of a Missy party or a Lil Kim versus Foxy Brown party, those kinds of things. You don't always necessarily have the creative leeway to do those things. So you in fact have to invest in yourself
Yeah.
and make them happen. So I
Yeah.
want to publicly, big you up and say
You,
you're early in the game, but you're realizing that you got to reinvest in yourself and take those chances, and that's a really big deal. So I want you, we're not wrapping up the show, but I want you to make sure you tell people
Yes.
how they can get tickets, because I want everybody to support this brother, because he gets it. And what I like about what I told J Ray outside, what I dig about Saint Smith as a DJ is he's a musician.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
he's got the air. So he's
yeah.
got the air. He's not playing around. He knows music. So that's what made me feel like, okay, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. So please let people know how they get tickets to be at the Water to Wine on this Sunday.
Yes. Well, I want before I answer that, I do want to thank you personally as well, just for not only the big ups, but also for the tips. What I will have been saying like to people all along is that coming into this DJ round, because I had used a lot of like artists to DJ pipeline examples, like the Solange and the Erica Bakus, and like seeing that. So I thought like I was possible. And I've always like recorded myself and engineered myself. So I was always familiar with BPMs and beat matching and like doing my album and stuff. So but I will say that like there's so much that you don't know. Like there's so much nuance to it, and there's so much like tribal knowledge that you wouldn't know coming into it. And I will say that I have been like blessed to know people that are DJs, but to have people like really invest in me, even if it's just like a tip on the DMs, or like, you seeing something that I'm doing that's wrong, that you could say, hey, bro, do this a little bit different and make you 10 times more effective. So I appreciate that so much, because I do recognize like that it is a sister gift in a way, because like I said, I have been engineering and recording myself, but in a lot of ways, because of my experience and expertise in some musical disciplines, I do recognize that I do have a lot to learn as a DJ. And I mean, even watching y'all's interview last week with Artistic, I'm like, oh my God, like I really need to get my skill up. So like, just to be welcomed in that way has been so satisfying and lovely and gracious. And I always love to extend that to people coming into wherever they're coming into. So to receive that, it's like been so satisfying. And you've been like such a huge component of that. That's why I'm like, yeah, like I definitely got to have you at my party, and invite you. You
I'm
guys,
definitely gonna be there. Please tell Les.
yes.
Tell
So
them how they're gonna get there.
coming to my party is going to be in Center Stage, Atlanta. So, Center Stage is like iconic in Atlanta, just a performance venue. I love Center Stage. And I came here 10 years ago and I wasn't even living here and did a show there. So it's kind of like a full circle moment for me. But Center Stage, I know
Nice.
it's going to be fantastic. You can go on Ticketmaster and get your tickets, which I love that it makes it so legit. You get on Ticketmaster, and all you have to do is search for Water to Wine. I spelled it out. I didn't do any numbers. So Water to Wine, and they should come up. It is this Sunday, August 21st at 4 o'clock. 4 to 8:30 p.m. So just 4.5 hours of just pumping gospel. It's going to be so much fun. Just like I said, you get the ministry aspect of it as well. And I think like it's just such a great time in my life where I'm being faced with having to practice what I preach, and with struggles, going through a season of darkness. So it's like, I'm looking forward to the event too, because I'm gonna get what I need too. I'm gonna be ministering from that space too, where like, everything has a bit sunshines and rainbows for me, but I'm pressing through as well. And I'm pressing through to make sure that people have a fantastic, experience and really leave feeling elevated and lifted. So I'm really, really, really looking forward to it. I really am.
Well, we have put the link. So for all of y'all, we will make sure it's in the description too. But for those of y'all that are joining, we put the link in the chat. And we put your solo.2 link, because all of it is in there. So not only can you get Saint Smith's Water to Wine Gospel Day Party, you could get Saint Smith's music. Can we talk about you as a musician real quick? Like,
Absolutely.
So listen, so I got introduced to you through Round and Round. Like that was like my entryway. And I'm really like one of those people, I dial into backgrounds and melodies.
Yes.
And you are like an expert at that. Like I love the layering. And I even went back to your holiday song.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
From 2000 and was like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
he's just so
Right.
good at like melody and all of that. So I hear all of the influences that you mentioned before
Mhm.
in that, but talk to us a little bit. So you mentioned your classes, but you just said when I hold my classes, what are
Yeah.
those classes? Tell us because it feeds into your work. So tell us about
Yeah.
that.
So, okay. So, first of all, I gotta big up Faith Evans again because what you're talking about is just such her blueprint. Like I stole
Mhm.
that from her, like the
Yeah.
melodies and the backgrounds, and that's a Clark Sisters thing, obviously as well. But like those are my biggest influences, and I love that music is such an accessible training, even from like a non-technical standpoint. Like even just learning how to DJ, there's so much training that is accessible and
Mhm.
free. Just, anything that you want to learn, you can learn. And so I love that. But just as an artist, like it's so cool to, like I said, be in the game for 10 years and like just have had so many experiences. And I didn't have the experience where somebody taught me via class, but there were instances where I did my own research and study, or I got a tip from, somebody that I respected that kind of one up or like 10x my experience. So I have background and training in my corporate life. Like, I've always taught, like, I've always been a teacher though. Even since I was a kid, I've always tried to teach people what I know. So just as a manifestation of all of those things where I'm like, there are certain things that people will ask you, as a DJ, I'm sure you get the same questions all the time from new hopefuls and like, people that are getting into it. And I was getting a lot of that for people that were trying to get into the game as an artist. And so over the pandemic is when I mean, everybody's just learning their superpowers over the pandemic. So that was my first one where I did Indie Artist Toolkit, which was just like a couple hours worth of just my must-haves, my do's and don'ts, my resources that I use to have me successful, thus far, and things that I liked and things that were really working for me. So, people need to know, like, how do you get your song on iTunes? What's that process like? So I've talked about that. People ask me, like, how did you get your social media up? So I kind of talked about that. I can't talk about that now because I don't know what Instagram is doing now. So
Instagram don't care about none of us. So it's
no,
don't worry about it. You just
I
post. It's fine.
I don't tell you
Yeah.
about it. Back then I could tell you, but just those things that are for people, and then just kind of making it accessible for all those. You talked about like the background and layering. So my
Mhm.
second class was a background vocal intensive. I had Faith Evans and Duran Bernard on as my guest lecturers, and they just talked about their approaches and how they
Hold
come up.
on.
Pause.
Yeah, come on.
Pause. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You had Faith
You had
Evans
who?
and Durant on. Say that just one more time. We just need to make sure the people hear it.
Yeah, living legends, Faith Evans and Duran Bernard supported me in this class because I'm like, when I think about backgrounds, Faith is like the blueprint, like I said, for my recording artist self, and then Duran, he's just so
Mhm.
known for his work with Eric Badu and like the
Yeah.
live portion of that. So I really wanted to encompass all of that. So that, and then this year, most recently, I did a songwriting intensive where I had Ray Louise, I had Mel Smith, who's here in Atlanta, and just brilliant minds and thoughts and points of view that we can just learn from no matter the level. You on the Faith Evans level, you on the Duran level, you on my level, whatever level, we got something to say and we got something to teach. And I think it's just so cool to be able to do that and to be respected enough for people to come and sit in your face for however many hours and just hear what you have to say. And so, yeah, I love doing that education piece. I will continue to do that every year.
Wow.
So, I love the fact that that you feel like education is valid when it comes to this music game, when it comes to artistry
Mhm.
and putting out, not just putting stuff out just to be putting it out,
Yes.
but making sure you maximize your talent, make sure you maximize the art that you're putting out so that it lives forever. Talk to us about J. Ray Smith and I follow each other on Twitter, and every so often there are these recurring Twitter questions that make us roll our eyes because they come. It's kind of like the like a hay fever, right? Every now and then it comes around and it makes your eyes water, it makes your eyes roll, and you're just like, oh, here we go again. We're talking about this. Well, most recently, and this came from a very high profile person, but a question that always comes up on the social medias is always about, is R&B dead? And this time, that question was posed by none other than Mr. Sean Diddy Combs himself, which is a whole, the reactions were priceless because, hey, he really set himself up for that. But I want to talk to Smith. I want Smith to react to that whole conversation that comes up about what R&B, because clearly it's not about the fact that people aren't making R&B music anymore, but what
Right.
people are reacting to is the evolution of R&B and what it used to sound like and what it sounds like now. And so talk to that and why we are still, and how does it make you feel as an artist, a working artist, to hear people pose that question, is R&B dead?
Wow. Oh my God, this is so loaded. I will say that Puffy, you had no business asking that question. I love,
Zero
I love
business
Puffy.
asking.
I love Puffy. Y'all
Yeah.
know, anybody who knows me know I love me some Puffy before music still what. But you had no business asking that question. So that's the first thing I have to say. Second of all, I do think, oh my God, that question is very hate feverish, but it's so polarizing because I feel like there is a little bit of something to it. I don't want to call it truth, but there is something to it because obviously we can be very clear that the sounds are very different. My criticism of that question, though, is that are people able or ready to receive that? I think,
Mm.
well, I think, just from a general standpoint, the industry dictates what the masses listens to versus the, vice versa. But I question if people were coming out here doing all that belting and 90s vibrato and squalling and all that, would y'all be able to receive that at this time? And that question is, I don't think so, because we do have like our Kelly Prices and people like that that are still making albums and records and they get no play, which I like. Again, I know that has a lot to do with the engine and how that works, but
Mhm.
I do recognize that there, as a consumer artist combo here, I do recognize that there's something to it. I just wish that there was a way for it to be a more productive conversation, because what if we say that it is dead? Then what? Okay, so what happens to all
Right.
the people that are, what happens to the knees and the
Right.
no, come on. Like you said, as an artist, it's kind of like, okay, but then on the other hand, like, I don't do all that squalling. My tone is very, I stay in my mix. I don't sing in my chest. I have a very localized sensibility. So to listen to my music, you'll get the references and you'll get the points of reference, but the actual vocality of it all is not the 90s. So you could say the same about me. So I just have to kind of just, that's one of the conversations that I'm like, this is very, very interesting. But the good thing is that I'm very, I'm cozy.
Mhm.
I'm
Mm.
cozy. I'm very cozy. I'm comfortable in my skin as an artist, and I'm very clear on my sensibility. And I know that what I put out, it will be received by who it needs to be received from, and it'll resonate with who it's supposed to resonate with. So it might be a little bit too churchy for some, and that might not be R&B enough for some, but for the people that fall within the intersection of what I do, I feel like it will hit. And like Round and Round will be on my album. That was like technically the first single on my album. So, that's like a nice reference, kind of point of reference for the wavelength that I'll be on. It's gonna be very R&B. It's gonna have like, that church twinge, but I don't use the church twinge as a gimmick or like a crutch, but it just is very much who I am. Like I love Black church. I love the culture. Like I said, I recently started going back. So it's very much embedded in who I am, but I just do it in a kind of cheeky way or a way that is impactful. Like you said, the ministry of it all. Like, come on now, don't tell me you can't have a ministry moment on your R&B album. Like, somebody's going to, there's healing. And okay, so let me say something about this. The funniest thing that y'all were saying about this reverse thing. So I've been doing some of that on my album as well, but not for the demonic purposes.
I'd be like, you playing records backing on your record?
Not for sake of
Look,
this, but just for the sake of just like, just those references and just that touch. Like, never know. Like, hey, that's subconscious. Also, conscious do some powerful things. Like, you know, our brain is very, very powerful, and our ability to process things when we're not processing is like so apparent and real. So I'm fanning that little bit of those dark arts from my album too.
Yes.
Listen, there is power. There is power in repetition. That's why we have choruses are
Yes.
repeated, so
Yeah.
people it sticks in people's memory. That's
Yes.
why radio stations play certain records in a certain order over and over again, because it's called programming.
Right.
And there's no reason why you can't do the same thing, program people to buy your album,
Come on.
because Beyonce has people out here um repeating "You Won't Break My Soul," and that that's actually a very spiritual thing to say. You won't break my soul, because
And that's
you
what I'm
do.
saying. It's so subconscious where it's like you're saying and singing this, but guess what? You're building up in your DNA. Like
Yeah,
you're the words you're speaking are creating your world, and that's very powerful.
It's the thing. I think what we are putting words to is the thing that we've often asked that question of the what's missing. Because you know there's a disconnect that some of the folks that are in my, I'm gonna be an old man for a second, I do this from time to time, that are in my age bracket will say like, but there's a thing that's not there. And that's the
they
thing.
ain't standing flat footed and singing. That's what I want.
But it's like that additional layer of, I was just talking about me playing the D Train record during the intro, right? That man was standing flat footed and singing, but he was singing these dance records that inspired the hell. Keep on. What?
Sing.
What?
Right.
And you're singing and you're closing your eyes and you are throwing your hands up in the air. You in that club, you drunk a little bit.
Right.
But you are being fed, and you never will forget that feeling. So the spirit is in there with you too.
That's right.
That's the thing. That's like
Right.
that extra piece of like, Break My Soul captures that, where it's like, no, like it's a chant. Like it's a chant that you need. It's going to make your day better.
And so I'm so grateful to her for tapping into that, because I know like last week you were talking about just like the queer like recognition, all those things, but also that spiritual element that's just so intentional and so such a thread that's subtle, but when you really tap into it, like, you know, I think Break My Soul is the most in your face, but there's such a spiritual thread through that, you know, I think Beyonce knows at this point that we'll sing anything that she puts out, but just being so intentional about bringing the spirit into it is like, you know, the church geek in me is like gagging, because I'm like, yeah, that is a big piece of what's missing.
Wow.
Absolutely, it's ancestral. It's
It
also
is.
ancestral.
Ancestral. Oh my God. Yes. Yes.